So good morning, everyone. First of all, a big thank you for making to this session. This means that security is a concern for you, and you value that. So thank you for being here. Said that, I will first like to introduce my co-speaker, Larry McKay. He is Senior Manager Security Architecture. He is already Knox PMC, and he's committer on Apache Hadoop, Metron, and Ranger as well. I'm Krishna. I lead the platform security team at Cloudera, and I have decade-long of work experience in information security itself, where I have been into roles which has to do with Security Operations Center, Secure SDLC, compliances, and everything. I do have some certifications as well, and half a dozen more, apart from CSSP and CCSP, if that counts. So let's get started. So this is a general overview of what has happened till recent 6-12 months. So according to the Verizon report, we had more than 50,000 incidents. And out of those incidents, like there are 2,200 confirmed data breaches, while Symantec says that there are increased number of form jacking. So it is as simple as overlaying a frame on some customers or e-commerce websites where they can just fish for your credit cards. So that has been happening 48,000 unique websites on average per month, which is causing like billions of dollars losses. One good news which we have is cryptojacking. So it has reduced by 52% from in the last 6-7 months. Thanks to the cryptocurrencies declining prices. So it is not lucrative enough to hijack your Hadoop cluster and do a crypto mining on that. Also, we have seen in the European Union about few major MNCs getting penalties for non-compliance on GDPR side. One important thing, one important thing which I wanted to point out is the CVEs. This CVE is about, like everybody is talking about cloud nowadays, like Docker, Kubernetes, and containers. So this is about a low-level utility called as runc, which is behind every container. So if your container is running a process with root user, like UID 0, this CVE enables that user or process to escape to the host system and run everything and access even the other containers. This is there to kind of stress that whenever some updates comes or patches come, so patching is also important, otherwise your entire host can be compromised, like there is a escape vulnerability. So this one is runc vulnerability. This one is, we are talking about zip slip, where it is possible to create a specially crafted archive file which will enable someone to directly traversal, like // and it can go and overwrite certain binaries which will be executed and give them the system access or remote command execution sort of capabilities. So this one has affected Hadoop on the zip slip side. Everybody knows here the Meltdown, Spectre, and this thing. The spoiler, sorry about it. So this spoiler here, this is the new one on the Meltdown series where it again takes advantage of the speculative execution which you have in the Intel processors. AMD is not vulnerable to that. And you can have your memory space where you can go and leak the secrets. So this is about it. So this is just to give an instance where what is the current state of landscape we are talking about. And the next slide, which I'm going to talk about is, so this one shows like how easy it is for someone to go and find a specific Hadoop installation, look for the specific ports, and find out the Hadoop deployments on the internet. And very specifically, if he wants, he can go and look for your website, if it is accessible or not. And yeah, so like you can, it is a very serious threat, and it is, you should secure your Hadoop deployments. Going forward, again, like you can, if your Hadoop installation is not secure, it is very easy for someone to upload or download the bytes of data, and it poses a great threat in the cloud. So in cloud, you need to be more secure because your attacker can be from anywhere. Here you can notice that security is off, and there are terabytes of data to download without any authentication. Said that, I will hand over to Larry, which will take you through more on what Apache Knox is, various type of authentication providers, and how we can prevent this situation. Thank you, Larry.
Good afternoon. As Krishna said, I'm Larry McKay. I am the PMC chair for Apache Knox and actually one of the original founders of the project. Krishna did a really good job of kind of framing the problem of unsecure cluster deployments. Obviously, it's not only a cloud issue. We have on-prem deployments all over the world where folks have been comfortable maybe putting a firewall around your cluster, but it's still not a Kerberized cluster and essentially not secure. What we'll do is we'll talk about Apache Knox at a very high level and give you an overview of what its capabilities are and how those capabilities can be used to address some of the issues that Krishna spoke to, primarily from basically being at the perimeter. So Apache Knox is essentially it's a reverse proxy that is focused on the Hadoop ecosystem. In particular, it is what's called a trusted proxy within a Hadoop deployment, and that is a very powerful capability and configuration for adapting authentication from the outside world into a secure cluster. We started life as basically a REST API gateway, and evolved over time, as such things do, into also proxying the UIs for the various Hadoop components. One of the main motivations for Apache Knox was to encapsulate and minimize the burden of Kerberos on HTTP clients, because HTTP clients don't really expect to require Kerberos, and there are lots of modern authentication mechanisms, et cetera, that a trusted proxy allows you to take advantage of this way. Knox was built from the beginning to be highly flexible and extensible with providers in order to inject authentication, authorization, identity assertion, these different types of policy enforcement providers. So what else is Apache Knox? As I said, over time we've evolved. We started life as a project that proxied services for the Hadoop ecosystem. And at the core of that is this pluggable provider chain that we use. And it's pluggable and composable, so you can mix and match which providers you use for authentication or for federating an authentication event. Pick which authorization provider you use, which identity assertion provider you use, and you can integrate custom services as well. That pluggable provider chain or pipeline ended up being powerful and flexible enough that we saw value in providing another set of services to the consumers, which are authentication services. Our authentication services are Knox SSO and a Knox token service. These are Knox native APIs that take advantage of that same provider pipeline in order to do token exchange type scenarios where you essentially take an authentication event and normalize that into a single token type that can be used across the ecosystem. And we'll talk in a little more detail about that later. The third type of services that we provide are client services. We have a set of client classes that some customers and deployments use directly as an SDK. We've also built a simple Groovy-based DSL on top of that with closure support, so you can do some really powerful async type scripting to interact with your data platform in an asynchronous way. it also takes advantage of our authentication services, such as the Knox token service. So it allows you to have a command line Knox token session. Okay, it's very similar to a Kerberos KInit, where you log in and it acquires a token from a Knox token endpoint and caches that for you securely and allows you to use that to authenticate and interact with your data platform. Okay, some of the benefits of Knox. By abstracting the network details, we essentially hide the IP addresses, host names, ports that are actually being used inside of your cluster. Okay, some deployments like to use Knox at the perimeter as the termination point for TLS, where they fully understand the risks of doing so, but they don't have to enable SSL for all of the back-end services. Obviously, the encapsulation of Kerberos simplifies access to your data platform and removes some of the barriers of entry for HTTP clients who are not Kerberos friendly, and essentially extends your API reach out to clients that otherwise would not be able to consume resources from your platform. As a single access point, we enable deployments to firewall off your cluster and only expose the entry points for Knox for your HTTP endpoints. And that can greatly reduce administration overhead, et cetera. Centralized control. We have auditing of all of your HTTP access traffic that goes through the gateway. And we'll get into details as to what that captures. We have service level authorization available with various plugins, just like any of the other providers. But when you leverage the Ranger integration, that authorization policy is available through the central enterprise policy authoring system provided by Ranger. We have a built-in admin UI for Knox, which is new within the last couple of releases. And we've introduced service discovery and topology generation. And what this allows us to do is, in the past, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Knox, but in the past you had to craft XML topology files. And those files required you to put in the locations of all the services. What we've recently done is we've created a simplified descriptor, and there's a couple different formats for that file. It supports YAML, it supports JSON, and actually I think it still supports XML. But what you do, instead of that verbose XML and static URLs, is you specify just the service names that you need, okay? You specify the service names that you want to expose through the gateway. You refer to an external provider config instead of it all being in line inside the topology and having to be redundantly done possibly across topologies. You can share provider config. And then when that simple descriptor is deployed, we resolve all of that and we generate the XML topology for you. We have service discovery implemented today. It is pluggable. We have an implementation that gathers that service information, the endpoint information, whether it's in HA mode, all the related URLs related to HA, and we pull that out of Ambari. And we generate the topology. So now this enables your Knox deployment to actually be a living, breathing thing. Because what we do is we also monitor the Ambari API for any changes that happen in the cluster. If somebody moves the name node to another host, we detect that. We regenerate the topology and redeploy on the fly. You don't have to restart. So that's kind of an exciting recent feature. Enterprise integration, obviously LDAP and AD are table stakes. More enterprise authentication protocols such as SAML, OAuth, CAS, et cetera, and related IDPs are supported, and various SSO integration capabilities. Okay, as I mentioned before, Knox is a trusted proxy for the Hadoop ecosystem, and this picture kind of depicts, what that looks like. So if you see over on the right, you see this step 0. You have to explicitly configure Knox to be a trusted proxy for your backend services. Until you do that, Knox is not allowed to impersonate users, and you will see error messages to that effect if you try to use it that way. Once it's configured as a trusted proxy, that allows Knox, as you can see in step 4, sorry to go out of order, but it makes more sense this way. Knox authenticates as itself via Kerberos, because that's what your secure cluster wants. But it also asserts the identity of the user that it authenticated at the front door through this do-as mechanism that's prevalent throughout Hadoop. And so what that allows us to do is take a look on the left-hand side. Is this HTTP client and API consumer is unaware of Kerberos. This is depicting HTTP basic username and password authentication against LDAP or AD. And as far as the user is concerned, Kerberos is completely encapsulated, and they're unaware of it, and this is the picture they see, essentially. So I've spoken about these providers, these pluggable providers, and we have different types of providers. One is the web app security provider. This allows protections against common web application vulnerabilities by intercepting the requests as they go through the gateway and applying security headers, et cetera. Authentication federation providers. These are different flavors of the same thing. An authentication provider actively scrapes credentials from a request and validates the identity of the user, whereas a federation provider is taking some artifact of a previous authentication event, such as a SAML assertion or a JWT token, and federating that authentication event into the gateway and the data platform. Authorization providers obviously verify that the authenticated user is actually allowed to access the resources that they're requesting. This is also a pluggable provider. And audit isn't really a provider, but it's a capability inside of Knox that provides a detailed accounting of all the resource access. So for web application security, Knox, as well as all the back-end services, these are HTTP-based interactions, which means they are all vulnerable potentially to a number of web application security vulnerabilities. Our web application security provider can be enabled in your topology and be the first provider that the request hits through that pipeline, and it can interject security headers, enforcement of expectations for CSRF protections, looking for a particular header, et cetera. And we'll get into more details about that later. So authentication mechanisms, these are essentially authentication providers that we have out of the box for Apache Knox. Obviously, LDAP is, again, table stakes. It supports generic LDAP and AD authentication. PAM-based authentication, it actually leverages the same Shiro provider in Apache Knox, and that's Apache Shiro. And what PAM allows us to do is leverage the authentication mechanisms that are available at the OS level and configure through PAM modules. This mechanism is preferred in a lot of deployments because it removes some of the limitations of the Knox LDAP realm in terms of group lookup and nested groups and multiple OUs and these kinds of things. And performance is a lot better for group lookup, and it reduces the load on your LDAP server. The Hadoop auth provider is great for deployments where folks are actually very comfortable with Kerberos and Spinnago for their HTTP clients, but they do want some of the other benefits, such as having a single access point instead of exposing all of these hosts and ports to the world. So we leverage the Hadoop auth module that's in Hadoop itself to get Kerberos and Spinnago support, and normalize that as a regular provider. Header-based pre-auth provider is as simple as it sounds. It follows a common pattern where a trusted upstream proxy or gateway has done an authentication of a user and asserts that identity to us via HTTP headers. The username is always specified in this pattern. Optionally, you can configure it to also accept groups through another header. When you use this, you have to be very cognizant of the risks and that are associated with this. You need a real trust relationship between that gateway and the Knox endpoint. You can use client cert, and network security, et cetera, to make sure nobody can go around that other gateway and spoof some other identity simply by setting an HTTP header. More recent enterprise and modern authentication mechanisms are being provided through our Pack4J provider. So this buys us SAML, OAuth, CAS, OpenID Connect, et cetera. With Knox, it's often used in conjunction with the Knox SSO service because a lot of these are actually web-based flows where it expects browser redirects, et cetera. So the Knox SSO service, I mentioned this earlier. This is a native API in Knox itself. It's not proxied to anything else. But what it does is it allows us to integrate many Knox SSO or SSO IDPs with Apache Knox, but normalizes that authentication in that SSO session into a single cookie that can then be verified by any number of applications throughout the ecosystem without them knowing the details of SAML and OAuth and OpenID Connect and all of these things. They only need to know about our SSO cookie, which is JWT based, which is a JSON web token. The SSO cookie provider is another provider that you could then use in another topology to protect access to resources behind it and kind of layer Knox SSO support on top of services that are trusted proxy aware. That way they don't need to do their own integration with Knox SSO. It's kind of just, they get it for free through trusted proxy through that do-as impersonation. And Knox will cryptographically verify and validate that token at the gateway and then dispatch the request to the backend service, and they're not even aware it's Knox SSO. Knox token service uses the same JWT token with the intention of it being used as a bearer token for REST API access. And then there's a JWT provider that you could use to protect APIs and authenticate access to those APIs with that bearer token. And then we have a client cert provider that allows X509 authentication from the client, and the user identity is extracted from the distinguished name of the certificate. Okay, authorization. Authorization in Apache Knox is assumed to be service level authorization, okay? We take a layered approach to security, where at the perimeter, we're going to check whether or not you're allowed to access this resource at the service level. And we're going to allow finer-grained authorization policies or ACLs to be enforced further downstream, closer to the resources. Out of the box, Apache Knox has the ACLs authorization provider. This is a very simple authorization provider. If you try to use it in production, it works, but it's very verbose configuration, and your management doesn't, and administration of these doesn't scale as nicely. Our preferred integration or plugin is actually from Apache Ranger, and that gives you a centralized place to manage authorization policies. It has a very rich policy language. It has ABAC capabilities. It works in conjunction with Atlas, and it can get you down the road for GDPR type solutions and things like that. It is still important to understand that for Apache Knox, this is still service level authorization. But for the rest of the platform, which this slide shows you a number of the other services that are supported, you can have very fine-grained policies, attribute-based policies, time-based policies, et cetera. So audit. All service access through Apache Knox is audited with detailed entries for the original access request, what the IP address was, where the request came from, the URL they're trying to access, obviously timestamps, these kinds of things. The authentication event, whether the authentication event was successful. This will sometimes include group lookup, depending on the provider you're using. Identity assertion, which is another provider in our pipeline, and it allows you to maybe map principals. So you have an authentication event for Larry, but the back-end cluster is expecting El McKay. You can have different identity assertion plugins that can map principals for you. You can add group principals to a security context as it comes through based on who the user is or what other groups they're a member of. We also leverage identity assertion to integrate the Hadoop group lookup mechanism, so that you can do exactly the same group lookup as is done in the rest of your cluster there in the gateway. Authorization event, whether it's successful or not. And then the dispatch URL to the backend service. It'll show you what the HTTP status was for that event. It'll show you what URL was attempted. And all of these things are useful. All of these things are captured as separate entries for a given request. And this is very rich and important information when you're trying to debug things, because you can see whether you're getting a 403 from the authorization provider in Knox, or if it's actually going out to dispatch to the backend service or not. So, so that's what I wanted to cover as far as an overview of Knox and its capabilities and how, especially those that are relevant for this topic. And now Christian will talk about how we use those capabilities to address the original problem statement.
So thank you, Larry, for a great deal of knowledge about the Knox. And so Larry was pointing out what different form of authentications are available to you. It can be your LDAP, Active Directory, Okta, identity providers, like anything. And you have PAM-based support and what we can do. So what it helps also is, in many customer cases we have come across where you are leaking your Kerberos key tabs, though you're not supposed to, on the edge nodes and other stuff. And how Knox kind of eliminates the use of edge node, and you can directly use Knox to kind of encapsulate the Kerberos environment, and you can use username and password to directly access it. So we will discuss that sort of thing. Yeah, going to the next slide. So this was our actual problem statement where there was no security. We were able to download, upload, or do anything without authentication or authorization. And we will, like, because this is all web-based, and Larry discussed like how Knox has OWASP top 10 based security headers and other mechanisms to protect against. So we'll see how we can configure that and do much about it. So one thing which comes from my red teaming expertise, like when we do pen test in the real environments, is like what is your attack surface when you are kind of doing a pen test on a infrastructure. So first thing which Knox helps you with is you just have to open the Knox IP and port, and that will be your gateway to the entire Hadoop infrastructure. Like there's like a gate to the kingdom. So you don't need to access Hive, or you don't need to access Web SDFS, or you don't need to access Atlas, Ranger, anything directly from your environment, like from your laptop. Like you have to go. Knox has a proxy service where you can simply access all those services through Knox transparently if you don't want to enable authentication and you want to rely on Ranger to kind of give you an username password fill from the Ranger itself. You want to capitalize on Ambari credentials, you want to capitalize on Ranger, you can do that, but I kind of feel that if you can have it centrally, then instead of like, why not use Knox single sign-on capabilities to authenticate to Knox, and Knox will propagate that identity across services, than to use authentication, like integrate your Ambari, Ranger, and everything, and like go and authenticate separately to them. So one thing is, yeah, so Knox is, we'll talk like Knox is not a replacement for firewall. So you need to just whitelist Knox IP in a port through the cloud VPC. Second thing is Knox, as discussed, like it has a topology, which we call, so now it is automated. So you don't even have to kind of go and tell Knox in an XML file that, hey, my Hive is running here, my name node is running here, my resource manager is running here. So you don't need to tell it. It will discover automatically that which services are running on which IP and port and generate an XML topology for you. So this topology will have all the details, but if you don't want your users to access to any services, you can go into that XML and modify it that, hey, I just want to expose my Web SDFS or Hive interface or whatever you want to expose, those limited services in that topology. And anybody from outside will be just able to go and ping those services. Like they cannot access anything else which is not in the Knox topology. So you are kind of limiting them. So in fact, Knox allows you to have multiple topologies. So you can create different topologies for account, finance, or whatever department, and you can give them different kind of access. So that will change the URL just, and it does not change it actually. So it will be like Knox IP port / gateway / the topology name, and that's how you can segregate the entire thing without much effort. So now we are talking about authenticated access. So one thing is like Knox is not a replacement for Kerberos. You still need to enable Kerberos for your Hadoop cluster. But what it does is like abstraction on top of it that you don't need actual to do a KNet, or you did not go to kind of go in your Firefox or Chrome on your laptop and the end user machines and enable that for accessing like URI and then give domain name and enable it for accessing how to Kerberize your local system. So you can use Knox to kind of take that burden out of you. So here what we will do is, assuming that you are using some form of authentication, now when you're trying to access the same file explorer which I saw you in the problem statement, that how you can go and list and download everything, now when you kind of go to it, it will challenge you for the credentials. We'll see in the next slide how it like simply looks like. Maybe I can give a sneak peek here. So now it is challenging you here with the inter-credentials. This will be validated against the Active Directory or LDAP or Okta, whatever is configured in the background. And it won't allow you to kind of go without it. So again, what is necessary, what Larry also pointed out, the user which you use to authenticate against in this form, like here, it is a guest user. So this guest user will be propagated into the background services as a do as parameter. So all the authorization decision will be based on this username, unless if you want to change it to some email ID, like guest@example.com or guest@something.com, you need to do the host identity assertion, basically. While in the cloud environment, you have a host map providers where you can have your public cloud name and the internal AWS, whatever private IP, there is a mapping to do. So now only authorized users will have access. So I hope I'm clear here. Now coming to authorization, as Larry pointed out, we have two level of authorization. One is like what is comes with the Knox by default, where you can have whitelisting based on user, users group, and the IP address. That is the native support from the Knox itself, and if you need more finer level authorization, then you need to integrate Ranger as a plugin to Knox. And whatever Ranger does, it will do to you. So here, talking about this native thing that you can filter the users based on their groups. Even if you want, you can have user 1, user 2. If you want even access for a limited subset of users, you can do that, or you can make a group whatever way. So now if you will see that same use case which we took for the example, here now I am the guest user, and here you can see that user is equal to guest, and it is not able to access something for which the owner is Hive or Spark. So even if you're authenticated, now this authorization takes care of the next level that, hey, you are not entitled to use it. So after that, we are now talking about the web attack vectors. So I'm not sure how many of you are like dealing with the web application security vectors on a daily basis, but it is kind of like we receive multiple customer queries that, hey, how to configure, and these security headers are not present. This is the kind of most basic reports which we get from our customers around, like, can you enable this? Like, many of them are not aware that it is configurable on their end. So we do have configuration for cross-frame scripting, CSRF, which is limited to REST APIs. You have HSTS, where you can force someone to not downgrade your connection after the initial handshake. So it will prevent, again, while your initial communication was HTTPS, and now someone is trying to downgrade to HTTP, again, a plain text thing. Then you have MIME sniffing, which is very basic, but yeah, it's still important to prevent misreading the content types of the which you have on your web page. Cross-site scripting, we do have XSS protection header, which is like a protection just based on the browser itself. Like it is the responsibility of browser to detect your any cross-site scripting and block the entire page to be rendered. But yeah, we do set the header for it. One thing of prime importance here is this whitelisting. This is where you have the Knox SSO, single sign-on sort of thing, and your JWT bearer token is very important. So you don't want that JWT token to travel to anywhere else. And you can have a regex-based whitelist, which will bind it to a specific domain that, hey, whenever if somebody is trying to redirect it to attacker.com or anywhere evil.com, it won't allow you to do. And you can have very fine-grained regular expression-based whitelisting. Apart from that, you can also have the cross-origin resource sharing. So you can set it to which are the third-party websites which are supposed to access the data you want to access requests from. So Course will allow you to issue XML HTTP requests just based on those domains. So we do provide configuration for that. Other thing which is a very common day-to-day ask is like, I want to exclude certain ciphers, or I want to just include certain ciphers, or I want to include certain TLS 1.2 SSL protocols, or that sort of thing. You can even do that in Knox. So you can say that, hey, I just want to enable TLS 1.2, and I just want to I don't want SSL 3.0. So for the web app security provider, this is the sample config looks like. It is very simple. If you want to specifically whitelist any method, or you want to say like, hey, ignore these methods, you can just go and put it in the XML, and it will do the thing. However, be careful about this course thing. When you say course enable is equal to true, it sets this access control allow origin to star. That means like, when you set it to true, better define it for which trusted domain you want to set. So if otherwise, keep it to false. Now I have tried to do a mapping on terms of OWASP top 10 and how Apache Knox kind of have some prevention against. When we are talking about something like SQL injection and other stuff, yeah, we don't have anything which kind of goes into, because Knox is a proxy, it is not a web application firewall. So there is no protection on that front, but broken authentication, yeah, we do, yes, because Knox is supposed to be authentication provider. Sensitive data exposure, yes. So it goes like whenever you are doing a web HTTP query, so even a curl call, so it goes and encrypt every host IP port and even the location of the data, it encrypts that. When we talk about XXE, so again, because it is a proxy, it kind of goes like whatever XML data or body, it does not look into the request, but yeah, here it is like Knox itself is not vulnerable to XXE, like it's all topologies are there, but yeah, we have done. Broken access control, it is partially from Knox side, but if you include Ranger, you are completely protected against this like access control thing. So I have just included Knox here, but if you include Ranger, we are completely protected. Security misconfiguration, I think it does. Like if you know that some of things are broken, just exclude them from your topology, or if you know that some of your services are running just on HTTP, then still you can have Knox on the perimeter, and Knox can talk to them within your infrastructure without like all your sensitive things are within your network. Cross-site scripting, yeah, partially because we have this browser-based protection from the security response header side. In security cell, no, we don't have. Using no components with non-vulnerabilities, partially. Uh, like the same thing which I said, like whatever is there vulnerable, so it will guard you against at least securing the parameter. So whatever is there, it will be on your own network, and you can use, yeah. So coming to this insufficient login monitoring, so Knox does not provide any monitoring. So you need to either attach the logs to your SIEM or something to get meaningful insight. But yeah, logging we do. So this is something which tells about what Knox doesn't do, but you should do. So this is an extra slide which I thought would be of good importance. So Knox does not eliminate the need of WAF, IDS, IPS, or SIEM, or network firewall, or API gateway. You can still use these things to enhance your security posture. Now coming to the infra side, like you definitely need to have a secure PAM configuration, like log all the events, how many password history you want, how many failed login attempts you want to configure for enable security enhanced Linux. I have seen even multiple production systems which have still full-blown everything installed. Do not do that. Just install whatever is needed, disable new services like Bluetooth and everything. They are not required on the server. Application server, JT, Tomcat, etc. You can harden them. There are CIS benchmark, CIS hardening guidelines, which you can refer to, or you can use even Knox to kind of exclude ciphers, which you don't want to use. Database servers, I have seen them mostly configured to listen to everything. Please configure them, like enable TLS even on the local LAN if you don't want to leak anything. And instead of listening to star, just bind them to some IP addresses on at least the subnet on which they should listen, not everything. Again, on the KDC server, you want to, like what are the supported ink types, and these are more on the hardening of the Kerberos side. This is most important thing. I have often find that many people put it to star, and which kinds of makes basically any host or group to kind of go and this is a kind of very serious configuration issue. So just put it to the host you trust and the groups you want to kind of go and access your HDFS and everything. So if you put a star, anybody like anonymous user can also go and access. So if I want to have to conclude, I think I will say that Knox gives you Kerberos encapsulation where you can just access everything in the browser without even being aware that, hey, your entire Hadoop structure is Kerberized. It eliminates the need for developing your own custom solution for authentication to Hadoop ecosystem. Yeah, it has, like if you want to enable something like you are very security conscious, you want to enable two-factor authentication, then if you enable Okta here, then you can have a two-factor authentication from those identity providers who support two-factor authentication already available here. And then, so it is not a WAF, but it does protect against OWASP top 10 threats selectively, So now, any questions, Larry?
I have a question about HA. We have
So Knox has a HA, but we don't share states. So all the Knox instances are like, no, it is like not different config. They use same gateway store and everything, but they don't share state among each instances. Larry, you want to add something?
It's funny the way you ask the question is different than the way we present the answer. To me, a load balancer approach to HA is pretty good. You would rather have it like an active passive type HA mechanism for Knox instances? Round robin with. That has been something that has been on and off the roadmap for years, actually. We should talk offline about the first problem, though. As far as chaining providers goes, I mean, it seems like a good way to possibly get multi-factor authentication type scenarios, but what we've found is that there are a lot of providers available by just leveraging the OpenID Connect capability in Pack4J. So we've kind of de-emphasized that roadmap item. But we can talk about that. Bring it to the community list, the email list, for sure. Yes?
So if I have all these service level authorization, do I really need Ranger or determine recommended or is not?
Absolutely. I mean, the service level authorization is just that. Is Larry allowed to access Web HDFS? But if you want finer grain or more interesting authorization policies, sometimes it's not necessary, right? Yeah, it is. Okay, is your
so is it the second layer of security, or if I'm not interested in finer grain access control, is Ranger a second layer of security, or?
I would actually view it as the primary way to get certain type of rich authorization policies. So it's not only necessarily finer grained, but through the combination of Ranger and Atlas, you can tag certain data sets as being PII, right? And based on what type of category that this data is in, Larry may not have access, even though he has access to Web HDFS, right? So, it has to go into your full kind of big picture, data access and protection methodology, I think. Yeah. So.
But yeah, the short answer is no. Like if you just need, this guy needs access to Web HDFS, Knox is enough.
Yeah, Knox does not require Ranger, but your organization probably does. Yes.
Simple question. The upstream Knox has the stable version 1.3 and Hadoop cluster 1.0.0.
So he's, yeah. Hadoop 3.1 has 1.0.0
Yeah.
Knox.
Official distribution now still delivering 1.0.0.
Oh, okay. So Apache Knox has recently gotten a 1.3 release.
Yeah.
So HTTP releases are generally, the main release that it took from Apache, plus patches. So we backport, especially important bug fixes and performance enhancements and things like that, generally, without completely pulling the new Apache release, because there's some possibility of destabilization as well. So we were very kind of surgical about which bug fixes they bring back. Being at the the front door of your data, we want to be very careful.
So then, how long? Wait, how long
Yeah.
should it take to adopt?
There's usually a natural I can't give you a number, right? But there's usually kind of a natural feel for when, okay, this is a good time to start tracking master and the most recent release and pull it in. And we have been discussing that, as being, time. So our upcoming releases should start reflecting that.
Because just recently found a bug that filed it, and it was already too late for 1.3 release and Knox on an upstream. So they promised to fix it in the next one. But I have customers with Hadoop stack. They're still having 1.0.0.
Right, right.
I think we
That's
need
why I'm
to.
asking.
Yeah, I mean, again, that 1.0.0, that's the base release number. We need to talk about which actual version of HTTP they have, because they have X number of patches,
Okay.
right? And we can talk offline, and we can talk about your customers. Sure. Yeah.
Does Knox simplify identity management database across authentication feature and authorization features? For example, if I have users, these are authenticated, does that seamlessly flow into, let's say, Ranger's database of user to group mapping? How does it have any?
No, I don't think so. I'm not entirely sure I got your question, but configuring things for Knox does not mean they're configured for other things. If you're able to authenticate to a particular Knox topology, keep in mind that you can have different LDAP servers per topology. That doesn't mean that topology is the same as what Ranger's synced with. So I think no. Was that your question?
Yeah, something similar we can discuss more.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
We're still on a very ancient version of Knox because we're still in HTTP 2.6. But we are having an issue with underlying Hive and the way Knox handles the response to requests to Hive. Always picking one Hive server over all the others. If you have a multi-Hive server, it's really interesting. We ran into a situation where all the users coming through Knox landed in the same Hive server until that Hive server went down. Then they all landed in the next Hive server until that Hive server went down. And we haven't really got.
And they were going down because of the Knox traffic.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's actually that's something that we are aware of, and we do not do. We have HA support in our dispatch to the Hive servers. We do not have load balanced support.
Yes.
And it is something on the roadmap.
On a internal side, the JDBC driver does that because it just looks into Zookeeper, all the available Hive servers, and picks one of those.
Yeah.
And Knox just takes the first one. And,
Right.
Yeah. So, but even in the most recent Knox version, that's not fixed, or that's not addressed.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's still a problem. And the we need to emphasize that on the roadmap. The fact that the driver needs to have line of sight of Zookeeper is a problem. We don't want to expose Zookeeper to the world. So we hide access to that through Knox, but yeah, we don't load balance. And there are complications there, and others may have seen situations where the dispatch to a particular Hive instance, like if that Hive server is restarted, they have some cookie optimization thing.
Yeah, the query's gone. It's broken. If the Hive server goes down while there's a session there, it's just the query's broken anyway.
Yeah, and you have to restart Knox because believe it or not, that cookie gets replayed, and they no longer know about it if you restart the Hive server. So there are some complications in that dispatch area that need to be addressed. But there's a great deal more success than there is frustration with it.
Yeah, we're using Knox heavily.
Yeah.
In all services.
Terrific.
And it's been a great help in many cases because I can offload a lot of work to a single point outside of my clusters and address multiple clusters from one machine by going through the Knox instances and stuff. That
Yeah.
can be helpful.
Wonderful.
This Hive thing is
Yeah, 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 you're not alone. Okay. Anyone else? Yes?
There is a product named Hue from Cloudera. Do you know it?
Yes.
Are you going to support proxy in Hue, or what is the characteristic of Hue?
I don't know the roadmap commitment to that. I think we may be able to proxy the UI of Hue, but I believe that there are complications with getting between the UI and the back-end services, because I believe that's RPC and not HTTP. So what, were you asking whether we're going to proxy the UI?
I'm asking what is the correct way to use Knox with Hue, or just Hue, because it also can be the single point of access to cluster.
Yeah, basically we don't have answer right now.
We don't have an answer to that, yeah. Yeah, you should, if you are a Cloudera customer, you should bring that up with support or someone at Cloudera to get it on the roadmap.
Okay, I was actually going to ask a question. That doesn't make sense now. The integration of Knox with Impala, anything on the roadmap?
We have been talking about the technical details of that. I can't commit to any that there's been any kind of commitments to that. There is work that needs to be done. Impala is largely written in C. Transport layer is different. Well, I mean, I think they're still using Thrift, but not Thrift over HTTP, and that's required for Knox integration with Hive Server 2. Is that Hive Server 2 be running in HTTP mode and not RPC mode? So they would have to be able to support Thrift over HTTP, and I'm not entirely sure what support they have for trusted proxy for impersonation. But we have started talking about it anyway.
Do they have support for impersonation? So,
Okay.
Just curious, you are talking about Cloudera as they, you are Cloudera as well.
Haven't completely made the mental shift yet, but and I still see the green in the elephants. So, so yes, we.
We. The power of we.
Yes, the power of we. Thank you for pointing that out. Anyone else?
So if I want to add external services, is it not supported? Because I don't know, I'm not the expert, but I heard that some tool wasn't supported. So is it possible to add it?
Yes.
Yourself?
Yeah, there is a for very simple services, if you have a simple REST API and you don't require a lot of rewriting of it, it's really straightforward, and you can do it in a declarative way with just 2 XML files.
Yeah, service.xml and rewrite.xml. There's 2 files which you can use.
What's the added value of supported services? I mean, what's the difference between tools which are supported by Knox and non-supported tools? Like this tool from Cloudera, the last question which I asked
Yeah.
some services.
Hue and Impala, I think. That's what.
So I guess the answer is kind of twofold. One is, unlike things like Nginx, Knox actually has a set of service definitions predefined that are targeted for the Hadoop ecosystem. So in that respect, they are supported by Apache Knox. From the HTTP perspective and Horton Cloudera perspective, we are, we're running regression tests and QE tests and functional tests, and we're ensuring that these work for these releases and these combinations of components and things like that. So as far as Cloudera support of these, obviously you will have support available to you. If you integrate your own, you will have support from, obviously, the Apache Knox community, and to some degree from Cloudera in terms of how you integrate things in general, but we're not going to obviously support your service. Make sense?
Just a question. If you talk two-factor authentication with Knox, like user ID, password plus a certificate?
So someone earlier asked something similar in terms of being able to chain authentication providers together. That has been on and off the roadmap in order to do it in some kind of native proprietary way in Knox, because you can get two-factor auth from a number of IDPs through OpenID Connect or OAuth or some other mechanism for which we have a provider. So there have been so you can, for instance, you can use our Pack4J provider to configure Google Authenticator, which will give you two-factor authentication, or Okta, via SAML, and you can get.
You need to use an external authenticator.
Yeah. So, okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.